They told me to turn him away, but I saw the fear in his eyes. I gave him food, shelter, and his dignity back. And for that, they called me a criminal. Maybe I broke the law, but I didn't break my humanity.
So tell me, how far would you go when compassion is forbidden?
They told me to turn him away, that helping him was illegal, but I saw fear in his eyes, and I couldn't walk past. I gave him food, shelter, dignity, and for that, they called me a criminal. Maybe I broke the law, but I didn't break my humanity. So tell me, how far would you go when compassion is forbidden? My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I never thought I'd end up in a courtroom fighting for my freedom. I'm a nurse. I spent 23 years caring for people, healing wounds, holding hands in the dark when someone was scared. That's all I've ever known how to do, help people. But on a cold November night in Portland, Maine, everything changed. I was leaving my shift at Mercy General Hospital around 11 p.m. The wind cut through the parking lot like broken glass, and the first snow of the season was starting to fall. I pulled my coat tighter and hurried toward my car, my breath visible in the freezing air. That's when I saw him. An older man, maybe 65, sitting against the brick wall of the hospital's service entrance. He wore a thin jacket that had seen better years, and his hands were shaking, not just from the cold. His face was bruised, swollen around the left eye, and there was dried blood on his temple. Our eyes met. I saw something there that stopped me dead in my tracks. It wasn't just fear. It was resignation, like he'd already accepted that no one was going to help him, that he didn't matter anymore. "Sir?" I approached slowly, kneeling down beside him. "Are you hurt?" He flinched, pulling away. "Please, don't call anyone. They'll send me back." His accent was thick, Eastern European maybe. His English was broken but understandable. "Send you back where?" I asked gently. He just shook his head, tears forming in his eyes. "I have nowhere to go. They say if someone helps me, they break law. I don't want make trouble." My heart shattered. I knew exactly what he was talking about. 6 months earlier, our city had passed Ordinance 14B, part of a statewide crackdown. It made it illegal to provide shelter, food, or assistance to undocumented individuals without reporting them to authorities within 4 hours. The fine was steep, up to $50,000, and repeat offenders could face jail time. The ordinance was sold as a way to discourage illegal immigration and protect resources for citizens. But standing there in that parking lot, looking at this frightened, injured man, all I could think was, when did we become a place where kindness is a crime? "What's your name?" I asked softly. "Dimitri," he whispered. "Dimitri, I'm Sarah, and I'm going to help you." No. He tried to wave me off. "You get in trouble, I am nobody. Just let me be." But I couldn't. God help me. I couldn't. I helped him to his feet. He winced, clearly in pain, and guided him to my car. He protested the whole way, but he was also too weak to really resist. As I drove through the empty streets toward my house on Maplewood Avenue, my hands gripped the steering wheel tight. I knew what I was doing. I knew what it could cost me. But as I glanced over at Dimitri, who had his eyes closed and was trembling in the passenger seat, I also knew something else. Some laws are unjust, and sometimes the most human thing you can do is break them. When we pulled into my driveway, I saw Mrs. Henderson's curtains flutter across the street. She was watching. Of course she was. Mrs. Henderson had lived on Maplewood Avenue for 40 years and considered herself the neighborhood's unofficial watchdog. I helped Dimitri inside, got him settled on the couch, and went to get the first aid kit. As I cleaned the wound on his head, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We know what you're doing. You have 4 hours." My blood ran cold. The text message glowed on my screen like a threat carved in ice. "We know what you're doing. You have 4 hours." My hands froze over Dimitri's injured temple. 4 hours. That's what the ordinance allowed, before I'd be considered harboring an undocumented person. 4 hours to either turn him in or become a criminal myself. I looked at Dimitri. He had fallen asleep on my couch, exhausted and broken. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, and even in sleep, his face was creased with worry. 4 hours wasn't enough time to find him proper help. The only refugee assistance center within 50 miles had shut down last year due to lack of funding. The churches that used to offer sanctuary had been threatened with losing their tax-exempt status. Every avenue of legitimate help had been systematically closed. I deleted the text and turned off my phone. Then I locked my doors, closed all the curtains, and made a decision that would change my life forever. I wasn't going to report him. Over the next few days, I learned Dimitri's story. He had been a civil engineer in Ukraine, fled when the war came too close to his family. His wife and daughter were killed in a bombing. He spent everything he had to get here, believing America was still the place that welcomed the weary and desperate. But when he arrived, the world had changed. The detention centers were full, the courts were backed up for years, and the new laws made it nearly impossible for ordinary people to help without facing consequences. "I just want to work," he told me one evening, his English improving each day. "I want to be useful again, not burden." "You're not a burden, Dimitri," I said firmly. "You're a human being who deserves dignity." But keeping him hidden was harder than I'd imagined. Quick question for you. This story takes place in a small city in Maine. Where are you from? Drop in the comments below. Mrs. Henderson started asking questions. She'd seen me carrying groceries, more than usual, and noticed my curtain stayed drawn all day. "Everything all right, dear?" she asked one morning when I was checking my mailbox. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were sharp. "Just fine, Mrs. Henderson. Working a lot of night shifts, trying to catch up on sleep during the day." She didn't look convinced. "I thought I heard a man's voice the other night. Deep voice. Not your usual visitors." My heart pounded. "Just the TV." She nodded slowly. "Of course. The TV. Well, you know I'm always here if you need anything. Or if you see anything unusual in the neighborhood." The way she emphasized unusual sent chills down my spine. I went back inside and found Dimitri looking worried. "She knows," he said quietly. "I should go. I bring trouble to you." "You're not going anywhere," I said, more forcefully than I intended. "Let me handle this." But the pressure was mounting from all sides. At work, my colleague Jennifer pulled me aside. "Sarah, people are talking. Someone said they saw you helping a homeless man the other night. With everything going on politically, you need to be careful." "I gave a man a ride home," I said carefully. "Is that a crime now?" "You know what I mean." She lowered her voice. "They're cracking down hard. Dr. Reynolds got reported last month just for treating someone without checking their documentation first. He's under investigation." I felt the walls closing in. That night, I got another text. Same unknown number. "Time's up. We've filed a complaint. Authorities will be visiting soon. Turn him over voluntarily and the penalty will be reduced. Continue harboring him, and you'll face the full extent of the law." I showed Dimitri the message. "I go now," he said, standing up. "Tonight, you have done so much. I cannot let you lose everything for me." I grabbed his arm. "No, I'm not letting you go out there alone. We're going to fight this." "Fight?" He looked at me with confusion and fear. "Fight how?" I took a deep breath. "I'm going to call a lawyer." The lawyer's office smelled like old books and desperation. His name was Marcus Chen, and he specialized in civil rights cases, the kind that never made people rich but occasionally made history. When I called him, explaining my situation in hurried whispers, he'd agreed to see me immediately. Now, sitting across from his cluttered desk, I watched him review the complaint that had been filed against me. "They're not wasting time," Marcus said, flipping through pages. "The complaint was filed by your neighbor, a Mrs. Patricia Henderson, and co-signed by 2 other residents on your street. They claim you've been harboring an undocumented individual for 8 days now." 8 days. It felt like a lifetime. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "They'll investigate. If they find Dimitri at your residence, you'll be charged under Ordinance 14B. First offense carries a fine of up to $50,000 and potentially 6 months in jail. The state prosecutor's office has been aggressive about making examples of people." My stomach churned. "Examples? To discourage others from doing what you're doing." He studied my face carefully. "Sarah, I need to ask you something important. Why are you doing this? You're a respected nurse. You have a good life. You could walk away right now, tell them you made a mistake, and probably face minimal consequences." I thought about Dimitri, hiding in my house right now, probably terrified. I thought about the fear in his eyes that first night, the resignation that he didn't matter. "Because it's wrong," I said simply. "The law is wrong." Marcus nodded slowly. "Then we're going to fight. But I need you to understand something. This isn't just about you anymore. If we take this to court, it becomes public. Your name, your face, Your story. It'll be everywhere. You'll become the face of resistance to this ordinance. Some people will call you a hero. Most will call you a criminal. Can you handle that? I thought about my parents, both deceased now. My father had been a pastor, my mother a teacher. They'd raised me to believe that character wasn't about following rules blindly. It was about knowing when to stand up, even when standing up cost you everything. I can handle it, I said. But I wasn't sure I believed myself. The investigation moved fast. 3 days later, 2 officers from Immigration and Customs Enforcement showed up at my door with a warrant. They searched my entire house while I stood in the living room, hands shaking, watching them tear apart the life I'd built. But they didn't find Dimitri, because 12 hours earlier, Marcus had helped me move him to a safe location, a network of volunteers who were quietly resisting the ordinance. I didn't know where he was, and that was by design. What I didn't know, I couldn't be forced to reveal. The lead officer, a stone-faced woman named Agent Reeves, stood in my living room after the search came up empty. "Where is he, Ms. Mitchell?" "I don't know what you're talking about. We have signed statements from 3 witnesses who saw you bring a foreign national into your home. We have records showing you purchased significantly more food over the past 2 weeks. We have evidence." "Evidence of what?" I met her eyes. "That I bought groceries? That I had a guest? Is that illegal now?" Agent Reeves stepped closer. "Obstruction of justice is illegal. Harboring undocumented individuals is illegal. And lying to federal officers is illegal. So I'm going to ask you one more time. Where is Dimitri Volkov?" Hearing his full name spoken aloud made it real. He wasn't just a scared man I'd helped. He was a person with a file, a case number, a target on his back. "I don't know where he is," I repeated. "And even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." The silence that followed was deafening. Agent Reeves handed me a document. "You're being charged under State Ordinance 14B with harboring and aiding an undocumented individual. Your court date is set for December 15th. I suggest you get a good lawyer." "I already have one," I said quietly. She left without another word. I closed the door and slid down against it, finally letting myself cry. The news hit the local station first. "Local nurse charged with harboring undocumented immigrant. Details at 11. I watched the segment with numb detachment. They used my nursing school photo, the one where I was smiling, optimistic, ready to heal the world. Now that same face was being labeled a criminal on television. My phone exploded. Most messages were hateful. "You're breaking the law. This is why our country is going downhill. I hope they throw the book at you." People I'd known for years, colleagues I'd worked beside, suddenly acted like I'd committed murder. But some messages were different. "You're doing the right thing. Thank you for being brave. Please don't back down. Someone has to stand up." Those messages kept me going. Marcus called an emergency meeting. "Sarah, we need to talk strategy. The prosecution is pushing hard on this. They want you to plead guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence. Fine only. No jail time. It would all be over in a week." I looked at him across the small coffee shop table where we'd met, afraid to hold these conversations in more public places now. "And if I don't? Then we go to trial. We argue that Ordinance 14B violates basic human rights, that it's unconstitutionally cruel, that it criminalizes compassion. But Sarah," he paused, choosing his words carefully, "we could lose. And if we lose at trial, the sentence could be much worse. They could make an example of you." "What does Dimitri say?" I asked. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "He says he'll turn himself in if it means protecting you. He feels responsible for all of this." My chest tightened. "No, absolutely not. He's terrified that you'll lose everything because of him. And I'm terrified that he'll lose his life if he goes back," I said, my voice rising. "Do you know what happens to people who get deported to active war zones? He has nothing left there. No family, no home, nothing." Marcus studied me for a long moment. "You really care about him." "I care about doing what's right," I corrected. "If it were anyone else in that situation, I'd do the same thing." "Would you?" he challenged gently. "Or is there something about Dimitri's story specifically that's driving this?" I thought about that first night, the resignation in his eyes, the belief that he didn't matter. "Maybe," I admitted. "Maybe it's because when I looked at him I saw what we've become as a country. We've always been complicated, always had our flaws. But somewhere along the way, we stopped seeing each other as human beings first. We started seeing papers, status, categories. And I can't accept that." Marcus nodded. "Then we fight." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. The courthouse steps were packed with protesters on the day I arrived. Some held signs supporting me. Compassion is not a crime. Healthcare, not handcuffs. Others were there to condemn me. Respect our laws. America for Americans. She's a criminal. The polarization was dizzying. Marcus guided me through the crowd, his hand on my elbow, while cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. Inside the courtroom, everything felt surreal. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Diane Foster, who had built her reputation on tough immigration enforcement. She looked at me like I was a problem to be solved, not a person. Judge Raymond Morrison presided, an older man with silver hair and an unreadable expression. Ms. Mitchell, the judge began, you're charged with violating State Ordinance 14B by knowingly harboring an undocumented individual without reporting them to the proper authorities. How do you plead? Marcus squeezed my hand. I stood. Not guilty, Your Honor. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Not guilty on the grounds that the law itself is unjust and unconstitutional, Marcus added. We intend to challenge Ordinance 14B in its entirety. Prosecutor Foster stood immediately. Your Honor, the defendant is attempting to use this trial as a political platform. The law is clear, and she knowingly violated it. This is a simple case of, nothing about this is simple, Judge Morrison interrupted quietly. He looked directly at me. Ms. Mitchell, do you understand the severity of what you're facing? Yes, Your Honor, I said, and I still maintain that I did nothing wrong. The judge leaned back. Then we proceed to trial. The trial began on a Monday morning in December, when Portland was buried under 8 inches of fresh snow. I sat at the defense table wearing the most professional outfit I owned, a navy blazer my mother had given me years ago before she passed. I imagined her sitting somewhere in the courtroom, watching, probably shaking her head at the mess I'd gotten myself into, but also understanding, maybe even proud. Prosecutor Diane Foster opened with precision strikes. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began, pacing before the 12 citizens who would decide my fate. This case is about the rule of law. It's about whether we, as a society, can maintain order and security if individuals decide which laws they'll follow and which they'll ignore. She turned, gesturing toward me. Sarah Mitchell is, by all accounts, a decent person, a dedicated nurse, someone who has helped countless people over her career. But that doesn't place her above the law. She pulled up a photograph on the courtroom screen. Surveillance footage from the hospital parking lot the night I met Dimitri. There we were, grainy but unmistakable, me helping him toward my car. On the night of November 12th, Ms. Mitchell encountered Dimitri Volkov, a Ukrainian national whose visa had expired 3 years prior. Instead of calling the authorities as Ordinance 14B requires, she took him to her home. She fed him. She sheltered him. She hid him from law enforcement. Foster's voice grew stronger. For 8 days, Ms. Mitchell knowingly harbored an individual with no legal right to be in this country. She didn't make a mistake. She made a choice, and that choice has consequences. She paused, making eye contact with each juror. If we allow people to simply ignore laws they disagree with, we descend into chaos. The law exists to protect us all, and Ms. Mitchell broke it, deliberately. The evidence will show this beyond any reasonable doubt. She sat down. Marcus stood, buttoning his jacket, taking a moment before approaching the jury. He had a different energy, quieter, more personal. My client did break the law, he began, and I felt my heart skip. She absolutely did. She's not denying that. But I want you to ask yourselves a question throughout this trial. Is it possible for a law itself to be wrong? He let that hang in the air. History is full of laws that we now recognize as unjust. Laws that once prohibited interracial marriage. Laws that enforced segregation. Laws that denied women the right to vote. People broke those laws too, and we call them heroes now. Marcus walked closer to the jury box. Sarah Mitchell is a nurse. For 23 years, she has taken an oath to do no harm, to provide care to anyone who needs it. On a freezing November night, she encountered a man who was injured, terrified, and had nowhere to go, and she did what her training, her conscience, and her humanity told her to do. She helped him. He pulled out a photograph of Dimitri, not a mugshot, but a photo from before, showing him with his late wife and daughter. This is who she helped. Not a criminal, not a threat. A man who had lost everything and was simply trying to survive. The prosecution wants you to believe this case is about order and law, but I would argue it's about something more fundamental. It's about whether we've become a society that punishes compassion. Marcus turned back to me, then to the jury. Sarah Mitchell saw a human being in need and refused to walk past. She knew the law. She understood the consequences. And she chose humanity anyway. The question you need to answer is simple. Should she be punished for that? He sat down beside me. The first witness was called Mrs. Henderson. She took the stand wearing a floral dress and her church pearls, looking every bit the concerned citizen. Prosecutor Foster guided her through her testimony with surgical precision. Mrs. Henderson, you've lived on Maplewood Avenue for how long? 42 years, she said proudly. And during that time, would you say you've gotten to know your neighbors well? Oh yes, we look out for each other. It's what good neighbors do. Can you tell us what you observed on the night of November 12th? Mrs. Henderson launched into her account, painting me as suspicious and secretive. I watched the jury's faces, trying to read them, and I couldn't tell which way they were leaning. Mrs. Henderson's testimony was devastating in its detail. She described seeing me help Dimitri from my car, noted that my curtains stayed closed for days afterward, mentioned the unusual amount of groceries I'd been buying. She'd even documented the times she heard a male voice coming from my house. I kept a notebook, she said, producing a small diary from her purse, just in case. Marcus stood for cross-examination, his expression gentle. Mrs. Henderson, you said you keep notes on your neighbor's activities? Only when something seems wrong, she defended. How do you determine what's wrong? Well, you just know when things aren't normal. And in the 42 years you've lived on Maplewood Avenue, have you reported neighbors to authorities before? She hesitated. A few times. How many times? I don't recall exactly. Marcus pulled out a document. According to public records, you've filed 17 complaints with various city departments over the past 15 years. Noise violations, parking disputes, allegations of suspicious activity. Would that sound accurate? Mrs. Henderson's face reddened. I believe in following rules. Do you believe in helping people in need? Of course, but only if they have the right paperwork. Objection. Prosecutor Foster stood. Argumentative. Sustained. Judge Morrison ruled. Rephrase, Mr. Chen. Marcus nodded. Mrs. Henderson, on that cold November night when you saw Ms. Mitchell helping an injured man, did you consider calling an ambulance? Offering assistance yourself? That wasn't my responsibility. But reporting your neighbor to authorities was? She lifted her chin. I was protecting my community. From what? Marcus asked softly. From a 65-year-old injured man seeking shelter from the cold? From people who break the law, she said firmly. The prosecution's case continued over the next 2 days. They brought in ICE agent Reeves, who testified about the search of my home and my refusal to cooperate. They presented phone records showing calls between Marcus and me. They built a timeline that made me look calculated and deliberate in my crime. But on the third day, it was our turn. Marcus called our first witness, Dr. Robert Yang, a colleague from Mercy General Hospital, who had worked with me for 15 years. Dr. Yang, Marcus began. Can you describe Ms. Mitchell's character as a medical professional? Sarah is one of the most dedicated nurses I've ever worked with, Dr. Yang said without hesitation. She treats every patient with the same level of care and dignity, regardless of who they are or their ability to pay. Has she ever refused to treat someone? Never. Not once. Even when patients are difficult or hostile, Sarah maintains her professionalism and compassion. Would you say that compassion extends beyond the hospital? Absolutely. Sarah volunteers at free clinics on her days off. She's helped organize supply drives for homeless shelters. She's the first person to show up when someone needs help. Marcus nodded. So, in your professional opinion, when Ms. Mitchell encountered an injured man in the hospital parking lot, would helping him be consistent with her character? It would be completely consistent. I'd be more surprised if she hadn't helped. The prosecution tried to undermine his testimony during cross-examination, but Dr. Yang held firm. Then Marcus called Father Michael O'Connor, a Catholic priest who ran a small church downtown. Father O'Connor, Marcus said, your church used to operate a sanctuary program, correct? Yes, the elderly priest said sadly. For over 30 years, we provided shelter to refugees and immigrants seeking asylum. What happened to that program? We were forced to shut it down last year. The new ordinances made it too risky. We faced losing our tax-exempt status, facing fines, possible criminal charges. We simply couldn't afford to continue. And how did that make you feel? Father O'Connor's voice shook. It felt like we were being forced to choose between our faith and our safety. Jesus commanded us to welcome the stranger, to feed the hungry, to shelter those who have no home. But suddenly, following those teachings became a crime. Did you know Ms. Mitchell before this case? Yes. She's attended our church for years. She embodies everything we're supposed to teach about loving your neighbor. Prosecutor Foster stood. Objection. Relevance. Your Honor, Marcus said, I'm establishing that Ms. Mitchell's actions were consistent with deeply held moral and religious beliefs. Judge Morrison considered. I'll allow it, but move along, Mr. Chen. The testimonies continued, building a picture of who I was and why I'd made the choice I did. But the most important witness was yet to come. On the fourth day of trial, Marcus stood and said the words that made the entire courtroom go silent. The defense calls Dimitri Volkov to the stand. The prosecution objected immediately. Your Honor, Mr. Volkov is the subject of an ongoing immigration case. His testimony is irrelevant to... His testimony is central to this case, Marcus countered. The jury needs to understand who Ms. Mitchell helped and why. Judge Morrison deliberated. I'll allow it, but Mr. Volkov, I need to inform you that anything you say here today could be used in your own immigration proceedings. A door at the side of the courtroom opened, and Dimitri walked in. I hadn't seen him in weeks. He looked thinner, more tired, but he walked with dignity. When his eyes found mine, he gave me the smallest nod. He was sworn in and took his seat. Marcus approached gently. Mr. Volkov, can you tell us where you're from? I am from Kharkiv, Ukraine, Dimitri said, his accent still thick, but his English improved. I was civil engineer there for 32 years. Can you tell the jury what happened to your family? Dimitri's hands tightened on the armrests. In March, 2 years ago, there was bombing. My wife Katerina and daughter Anya, they were at market. I was at work. When I got home, his voice broke. There was nothing left, just pieces. I buried them in garden behind our house. The courtroom was absolutely still. Why did you come to America? Marcus asked softly. Because there was nothing left for me. No family. City was destroyed. I had some money saved and I thought America still was place of hope. Place where person could start again. What happened when you arrived? My visitor visa was approved before war. But when I came, everything was different. I tried to apply for asylum, but they said wait time was maybe 3 years, maybe 5. I had nowhere to stay. I tried to find work, but without papers nobody would hire me legally. I worked sometimes for cash, sleeping in shelters, in cars, wherever I could. What happened the night you met Miss Mitchell? Dimitri's eyes grew distant. I was robbed. 3 men. They took everything I had. My bag, my money, the photograph I had of my family. When I tried to stop them, they beat me, left me there. I went to hospital hoping someone would help, but they said they could not treat me without insurance, without payment. I was sitting outside, bleeding, and I thought, maybe this is where I die. Maybe this is how story ends. He looked directly at me. Then Sarah came. She didn't ask for papers. She didn't ask if I could pay. She just saw a person who needed help, and she helped. She brought me to her home. She cleaned my wounds. She gave me food, warm place to sleep. She gave me dignity when everyone else saw only problem. Marcus let that sit. Mr. Volkov, did you know that by helping you, Ms. Mitchell was breaking the law? Yes. I told her many times I should go. I didn't want her to have trouble because of me. But she said, he paused, searching for words. She said sometimes being human is more important than being legal. The prosecution's cross-examination was harsh. Mr. Volkov, Foster began, you admit you were in this country illegally, correct? My visa had expired, yes. You were working without authorization? I needed to survive. You were taking jobs from American citizens? I was taking jobs nobody else wanted. Cleaning, washing dishes, hard labor. But you were here illegally, breaking our laws? And you asked Ms. Mitchell to break them too? No, Dimitri said firmly. I never asked her to help me. She chose to help me. I tried to stop her. But you accepted her help anyway? What else should I do? Die in street to make law happy? Foster pressed harder, painting him as manipulative, as someone who took advantage of my kindness. But Dimitri held his ground, his quiet dignity somehow making her attacks seem cruel. When he was finally excused, he walked past me and whispered, "Thank you for believing I am worth saving." I fought back tears. The trial was nearing its end. The final day of testimony came too quickly. Marcus called me to the stand. This was the moment everything depended on. My chance to explain to 12 strangers why I'd done what I'd done. I was sworn in, my hand shaking slightly on the Bible, and took my seat. Marcus started with simple questions. My background, my career, my life in Portland, establishing who I was before any of this began. Then, Sarah, tell us what went through your mind when you first saw Dimitri that night. I took a breath. I saw someone who was hurt and scared. I saw someone who expected to be ignored. And I thought, I can't do that. I can't be the person who walks past. You knew about Ordinance 14B? Yes. Everyone in the medical field did. We'd been briefed on it. So you knew the consequences. I knew them. Then why? Why risk your career, your freedom, everything you'd built? I looked at the jury. Because I took an oath when I became a nurse. First, do no harm. That man was bleeding and frightened and had nowhere to go. If I'd walked past him, if I'd called ICE instead of helping him, I would have done harm. I would have violated everything I believe in, even if it meant breaking the law. Some laws ask us to abandon our humanity, I said quietly. I couldn't do that. Marcus nodded. What would you say to people who argue you should have just followed the rules? I'd say that following rules blindly is how good people end up doing terrible things. Throughout history, atrocities have been committed by people who were just following orders or just obeying the law. I believe we have a higher obligation to each other, to our shared humanity. Prosecutor Foster's cross-examination was brutal. Ms. Mitchell, she began, you describe yourself as someone who helps people. But isn't it true that by breaking the law, you've hurt the very system designed to protect everyone? I don't believe I hurt. Yes or no, Ms. Mitchell? Did you break the law? I paused. Yes. Did you know you were breaking the law when you did it? Yes. So you admit to knowingly and deliberately violating State Ordinance 14B? I admit to helping a man who needed help. That's not what I asked. But it's what happened. Foster walked closer. Do you believe you're above the law? No. I believe the law can be wrong. So you get to decide which laws to follow? I get to decide what kind of person I want to be, I said firmly. And I want to be someone who helps people, even when it's hard, even when it costs something, even when it's illegal. Even then, Foster turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the defendant admit to her crime. She knew the law, she understood the consequences, and she broke it anyway because she believed she knew better. That's not heroism. That's arrogance. She sat down. The closing arguments came next. Foster went first, reminding the jury of their duty to uphold the law, regardless of personal feelings. This isn't about whether Ms. Mitchell is a good person, she concluded. It's about whether we can maintain order and safety in our society. If everyone simply ignored laws they disagreed with, we'd have chaos. The defendant broke the law. The evidence is clear. You must find her guilty. Then Marcus stood for his closing. He walked slowly to the jury box, making eye contact with each person. Prosecutor Foster is right about one thing, he began. Sarah Mitchell did break the law. She doesn't deny it, but she's asking you to consider something deeper, whether that law should exist in the first place. He paused. You have power in this courtroom that goes beyond simply determining guilt or innocence. You have the power of what's called jury nullification. That means even if you believe the defendant technically broke the law, you can still vote not guilty if you believe the law itself is unjust, or if applying it would create an injustice. Foster stood. Your Honor, this is highly inappropriate. Mr. Chen, Judge Morrison warned, be very careful. Marcus nodded. I'm simply reminding the jury of their rights. You are the conscience of the community. You're not robots programmed to enforce every law regardless of context. You're human beings with hearts and minds, and the ability to determine what's right. He turned back to the jury. Sarah Mitchell saw a man who was injured and scared. She helped him. For that act of basic human decency, the state wants to fine her $50,000 and put her in jail. Ask yourselves, is that the kind of society we want to live in? One where compassion is criminalized? The prosecution says we need order. I agree. But order without justice is tyranny, and justice without mercy is cruelty. He gestured toward me. This woman saved a life, and you have the power to save hers. Not guilty isn't just a legal verdict. It's a statement about who we are and what we value. It's a reminder that laws serve people. People don't serve laws. Marcus's voice grew quiet but firm. When you deliberate, don't just think about what the law says. Think about what's right. Think about what you would want someone to do if it were you or someone you loved sitting in that parking lot, injured and alone. Find her not guilty. Not because she didn't break the law, but because she did something more important. She stayed human. He sat down beside me. The jury left to deliberate, and the waiting began. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. I spent that time in a small conference room with Marcus, unable to eat, barely able to breathe. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour felt like a lifetime. "What do you think?" I asked him for the 100th time. "I think we did everything we could," Marcus said, but his eyes betrayed his worry. Jury nullification is a long shot. Most people don't even know they have that power. And even when they do, they're afraid to use it. "So you think I'll be convicted?" He met my gaze. "I think it depends on whether those 12 people vote with their heads or their hearts." At 6:47 p.m., we got the call. The jury had reached a verdict. Walking back into that courtroom was the longest walk of my life. Every eye was on me. The gallery was packed. Reporters, supporters, protesters, curious onlookers. Mrs. Henderson sat in the third row, her face unreadable. I took my seat beside Marcus. Judge Morrison entered, and we all stood. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" he asked. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man named David Hutchins who worked as an accountant, stood. "We have, Your Honor. In the case of the State versus Sarah Mitchell, on the charge of violating State Ordinance 14B, how do you find?" The moment stretched impossibly long. "We find the defendant." My heart stopped. "Not guilty." The courtroom erupted. Cheers from one side, shouts of outrage from the other. Judge Morrison banged his gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but the noise continued. I sat frozen, unable to process what I'd just heard. "Not guilty." Marcus grabbed my hand, squeezing it tight. "You did it," he whispered. "Sarah, you did it." But I wasn't thinking about myself. I was thinking about Dimitri, who was sitting in the back of the courtroom with tears streaming down his face. I was thinking about every other person who might be sitting in a parking lot right now, injured and afraid, wondering if anyone would help. Judge Morrison finally restored order. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said sternly, "this verdict stands. Ms. Mitchell, you are free to go." He paused, looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, though I suspect this case is far from over in the broader sense. He was right. Within hours, the verdict was national news. "Jury acquits nurse who defied immigration law." The story went viral. My phone flooded with interview requests, speaking invitations, messages from people around the country sharing their own stories of helping others despite the law. But it also triggered a fierce backlash. State legislators immediately began working on strengthening Ordinance 14B, trying to close the loophole that had allowed me to go free. Prosecutor Foster gave a statement saying the verdict was a dangerous precedent that encourages lawlessness. And Mrs. Henderson? She moved away 3 months later. I never saw her again. The real victory came 2 weeks after the trial. I received a letter from the Refugee Assistance Center that had closed the year before. Thanks to the publicity from my case, they'd received enough donations to reopen. They were offering legal services, shelter coordination, and advocacy for undocumented individuals. "Your case reminded people that we can't abandon our humanity," the director wrote. "Thank you for being brave enough to stand up." As for Dimitri, his immigration case was still pending, but with the attention from the trial, he'd been granted temporary protected status while his asylum application was reviewed. He'd found work as an engineering consultant and was renting a small apartment downtown. He came to my house for dinner one evening, bringing flowers and a homemade Ukrainian dish. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, as we sat at my kitchen table. "You already have," I told him. "You reminded me why I became a nurse in the first place, to help people, all people." He smiled, but his eyes were serious. "What you did, it cost you so much. It cost me nothing compared to what you've lost," I said softly. "No," he shook his head. "What I lost I cannot get back. But what you gave me, dignity, hope, proof that good people still exist, that saved my life, not just body, soul." We ate in comfortable silence for a while. "What happens now?" he finally asked. I thought about that question. The trial was over, but the fight wasn't. Ordinance 14B still existed. People were still suffering under unjust laws, and I'd been given a platform I never wanted but couldn't ignore. "Now," I said, "we keep going. We keep helping people. We keep standing up, even if it's hard, especially when it's hard." 6 months after the trial, I stood before a crowd of 300 people at a community center in downtown Portland. They'd invited me to speak about my experience, about standing up for what's right even when it costs you everything. I'd said no at first. Public speaking terrified me, and I'd never wanted to be the face of a movement. But Marcus convinced me. "Your story matters," he'd said. "Not because you're special, but because you're ordinary. You're a nurse who saw someone in need and helped. That's something anyone can do. So there I was, standing at a podium, looking out at faces young and old, diverse and united by one simple belief, that compassion should never be a crime. I'm not a hero, I began, my voice shaking slightly. I want to make that clear from the start. I'm just someone who made a choice. And I'm here today because I believe we all face that same choice, every single day. The room was silent, attentive. We live in a world that's increasingly asking us to choose sides, to decide who deserves our help and who doesn't, to categorize people as us or them. And I think we've forgotten something fundamental. We're all human beings first. I told them Dimitri's story, not just the night I met him, but everything that came after. The fear, the trial, the uncertainty, the moments when I wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake. There were nights I couldn't sleep, I admitted. Nights when I thought about how much easier it would have been to just call ICE that first night, to follow the rules and protect myself. But then I'd remember the look in Dimitri's eyes, that resignation that he didn't matter. And I knew I couldn't live with myself if I'd walked away. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Here's what I learned through all of this. Laws are created by people, and sometimes people get it wrong. Throughout history, there have been laws that enforced slavery, prevented women from voting, criminalized interracial marriage, persecuted people for who they loved. Those laws existed, they were enforced, and people who broke them were called criminals. But we look back now and call them heroes, not because they broke laws, but because they refused to abandon their humanity when the law demanded it. I saw heads nodding in the audience. I'm not saying we should ignore all laws. Society needs structure and order, but I am saying that we need to think critically about laws that criminalize compassion, laws that punish people for helping each other, laws that ask us to choose between our humanity and our safety. The lesson I want to leave you with today is simple. I took a deep breath, feeling my mother's presence somehow, imagining my father's encouraging nod. When faced with injustice, don't wait for someone else to stand up. Don't wait for the perfect moment or perfect circumstances, because those rarely come. The moment to act is when you see someone in need. The moment to speak is when you hear something wrong. The moment to stand is when you see someone falling. Yes, it might cost you something. It might be uncomfortable. It might be scary. But the alternative, living in a world where we've all learned to look away, where we've all become so good at protecting ourselves that we've forgotten how to protect each other, that costs us something far greater. It costs us our humanity. I looked directly at the camera recording the speech, thinking about everyone who might watch this later. So here's my challenge to you. Find your Dimitri. Find that moment where you can make a difference, even if it's small, even if it's inconvenient, even if it costs you something. Help someone who needs it. Stand up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. Speak truth when silence would be easier. And remember, you don't have to be fearless. I was terrified every step of the way. You just have to be willing to act despite the fear. Because in the end, we won't be judged by the laws we followed. We'll be judged by how we treated each other when it mattered most. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. But I wasn't listening to the applause. I was looking at Dimitri, standing in the back of the room, his hand over his heart, tears in his eyes. And I was thinking about everyone out there right now who needed help. Everyone who was waiting for someone to see them, to care, to refuse to look away. The work wasn't finished. It was only beginning. But at least now, I knew I wasn't alone in doing it. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever faced a moment where doing the right thing felt impossible? A time when compassion and consequences collided? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience matters, and it might inspire someone else who's struggling with a similar choice. Let's build a community of people who refuse to look away. Drop your thoughts below. Let's keep this conversation going.